There are some television shows that feel less like fiction and more like a place we once visited. Their theme songs are unofficial anthems of our youth, and their characters feel like distant, eccentric relatives we remember fondly. For millions of people, one of those places is a delightfully gloomy mansion at 0001 Cemetery Lane. Just hearing the first two notes of its theme song, that iconic harpsichord melody followed by two crisp finger snaps, transports us back to a world that was altogether ooky, mysterious, and surprisingly wholesome. This was the world of the Addams Family, and in that world lived a boy unlike any other on television. He wasn't like the Ernest sons on Leave It to Beaver or Father Knows Best. This boy, Pugsley Addams, was a budding inventor of guillotines and anti-gravity guns, a cheerful accomplice to his sister's dark fascinations, and the proud owner of a pet octopus named Aristotle. He was stout, he was sweet-natured, and he was wonderfully, unapologetically weird. The young actor who brought him to life, Ken Weatherwax, became, for a brief and brilliant time, one of the most recognizable children in America. But what happens when the studio lights go dark and the show is canceled? What happens when you're no longer the beloved, bizarre boy from a famous family, but just a kid trying to navigate the brutal hallways of a normal junior high school? The story of Ken Weatherwax is not a simple tale of a child star who faded away. It's a profound and heartbreaking look at the cost of being captured in pop culture amber, a story about a boy who spent the rest of his life trying to escape the ghost of the one character who made him famous. It's a story of bullying, of struggle, and ultimately of a quiet, unsung resilience that is far more moving than any Hollywood ending. To understand the phenomenon of the Addams Family, you have to picture the world it landed in. The year was 1964. America was in a state of profound cultural vertigo. On one hand, it was still steeped in the wholesome, conformist ideals of the 1950s, a vision of life dominated by neat suburban homes, perfectly coiffed mothers in pearls, and pipe-smoking fathers who always knew best. This was the world presented in primetime on shows like The Donna Reed Show and The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet. It was a vision of a stable, prosperous, and reassuringly uniform America. But on the other hand, the ground was shaking. The buttoned-down Eisenhower era had given way to the turmoil and energy of the 1960s. The civil rights movement was finding its voice. The Cold War simmered with nuclear anxiety, and the first whispers of a youth-driven counterculture were beginning to challenge the status quo. It was a nation holding its breath, caught between the world it thought it was and the world it was about to become. Into this tense cultural landscape, two television shows appeared simultaneously, both based on macabre cartoons, The Munsters and The Addams Family. While both were monster-themed comedies, The Addams Family was something different. It was sharper, more satirical. It wasn't just a show about a weird family. It was a show about how a weird family could be happier, more loving, and more functional than any of the normal families in their neighborhood. The Addamses were fabulously wealthy, deeply in love, and encouraged their children's bizarre passions with unwavering support. They were the ultimate nonconformists, and the joke was always on the terrified, judgmental outsiders who couldn't comprehend their world. The show was a subversive masterpiece, a gentle but pointed critique of the very idea of American normalcy. And at the heart of this strange, loving clan was a young boy who, in a strange twist of fate, came from a family that was, in its own way, a part of Hollywood royalty. Kenneth Weatherwax was born in Los Angeles in 1955, not into a typical suburban family, but into the sprawling, complex web of show business. His connection to the industry was deep and immediate. His aunt was Ruby Keeler, one of the biggest stars of the 1930s, the effervescent tap dancing sensation of classic Warner Brothers musicals like 42nd Street. His half-brother Donald Keeler was also a working child actor, known for playing Timmy's friend Joey on the beloved series Lassie. From the moment he was born, Ken was surrounded by the language, the pressures, and the possibilities of a life in front of the camera. He began his career, as many children did, in commercials. He was a cute, round-faced kid, and he landed a toothpaste commercial early on. But his big break came when auditions began for a new sitcom based on the single-panel cartoons of Charles Addams. The producers were looking for a very specific type for the role of Pugsley. They needed a boy who looked like the character in the drawings, stout, with a round face and a slightly deadpan expression. Ken Weatherwax walked in, and physically, he was Pugsley Addams. He got the part, and at the age of 8, his life was changed forever. The 2 seasons he spent filming The Addams Family were, by all accounts, a remarkably happy and nurturing time. The cast became a genuine surrogate family. John Astin, who played the suave and passionate Gomez Addams, became a powerful father figure to Ken and his on-screen sister, Lisa Loring, who played Wednesday. Astin was a classically trained actor who took his craft seriously, but he was also a playful and encouraging presence. He taught them about acting, but more importantly, he treated them with respect and affection. Carolyn Jones, the elegant and vampiric Morticia, was a warm and maternal figure, and the entire adult cast, from Jackie Coogan as Uncle Fester to Ted Cassidy as Lurch, created a protective bubble around the 2 children. The set itself was a child's dream. It was a playground of trapdoors, secret passageways, and bizarre props. Ken got to play with dynamite caps, pet a lion, and work with his character's pet octopus, Aristotle. He and Lisa Loring were not just co-stars, they became like real-life siblings, forming a close bond that would last for the rest of his life. In interviews years later, both would speak of their time on the show with a deep and genuine fondness. It was, in many ways, an idyllic experience, a fun, creative, and supportive environment where his unique look and quiet demeanor were not just accepted, but celebrated. The tragedy was that this acceptance was confined to the soundstage. The real world, the world just outside the studio gates, would prove to be a far crueler place. In 1966, after just 64 episodes, ABC canceled The Addams Family. The ratings were still respectable, but the network decided that one monster-themed sitcom, The Munsters, was enough. For the adult actors, it was a disappointment, but it was simply the end of another job. They moved on to other roles. But for 10-year-old Ken Weatherwax, it was a cataclysm. He was suddenly unemployed, but he was also, in the eyes of the entire world, permanently and irrevocably Pugsley Addams. He tried to return to a normal life, enrolling in a local school, but there was nothing normal about his situation. He was now one of the most recognizable children in the country, but he was famous for playing a character who was seen as a strange, fat, and nerdy outcast. And the brutal, unforgiving social ecosystem of junior high school descended upon him. The bullying was relentless and savage. He was taunted, teased, and physically abused, not for who he was, but for who he had been on television. Imagine the psychological torment of that experience. Every day in the hallways, in the cafeteria, on the playground, he was called Pugsley. The name that had once been a source of fun and fame was now a weapon used against him, a slur designed to humiliate him. His weight, his on-screen persona, his association with all things weird, it all became fodder for his tormentors. The very things that had made him perfect for the role now made him a target. He was kicked out of 6 different schools due to the constant fighting and behavioral problems that arose from this daily persecution. The warm, supportive family of the television set had been replaced by a real world that was hostile and isolating. His acting career, for all intents and purposes, was over. He would occasionally reprise the role of Pugsley in reunion specials and voiceover work, but securing new different roles was impossible. Casting directors couldn't see past the iconic character. He was too recognizable. He was trapped. The face that had been his fortune was now his prison. The experience left him with deep emotional scars and a profound distrust of the industry that had built him up and then abandoned him. At the age of 17, desperate for an escape and a new identity, Ken made a decision that countless young men in difficult circumstances have made. He joined the Army. The military offered him something he hadn't had since the show was canceled: a place to belong and a uniform. The uniform was the key. In the Army, everyone looked the same. He wasn't Pugsley anymore. He was Private Weatherwax. It was a chance to shed the skin of his childhood fame and prove himself in a completely different arena. It was an act of profound rebellion, not against his family, but against the character that had come to define him. He served his country, hoping that when he returned, the world might finally see him as a man, not a memory. But the ghost of Pugsley Addams was patient. After leaving the Army, Ken found that little had changed. He still couldn't get acting jobs. The typecasting was as strong as ever. Faced with a dead end in front of the camera, he made a pivotal and deeply admirable decision. If he couldn't act, he would find another way to stay in the industry he had grown up in and still loved. He decided to work behind the scenes. He became a movie grip and a set builder. It was a physically demanding blue-collar job, far from the glamour of acting. As a grip, he was one of the essential but invisible crew members responsible for setting up and rigging the equipment that makes filming possible. He worked on the sets of numerous movies and television shows, including Cheers. It was here, in the camaraderie and hard work of a film crew, that he finally found a sense of peace and belonging. He was no longer a celebrity. He was just Ken, one of the guys. He was respected for his work ethic and his skills, not for a face he had worn as a child. This transition from star to crew member is perhaps the most moving part of his story. It was an act of profound humility and a testament to his genuine love for the craft of filmmaking. He found a way to remain in his world, but on his own, quiet terms, finally escaping the spotlight that had caused him so much pain. The emotional core of Ken Weatherwax's story lies in this stark contrast between his on-screen life and his off-screen struggle. The Addams Family mansion, with its grand rooms and hidden treasures, was a fiction. His real life was far more modest. He settled down, got married, and lived a quiet life in a small home in Southern California. The boy who grew up in a fictional world of fabulous wealth found contentment in a simple working-class existence. His bond with his on-screen sister Lisa Loring remained a powerful and grounding force throughout his life. They had shared a unique, surreal childhood, and they were the only 2 people on Earth who truly understood what the other had been through. They remained close friends for 50 years, often appearing together at fan conventions. These conventions became an important part of Ken's later life. In his youth, his fame had been a source of torment, but as an adult, he was able to connect with fans who didn't want to bully him, but who wanted to express their genuine love for the show and his character. He could finally experience the positive side of his legacy, meeting people who saw Pugsley not as a joke, but as a cherished part of their own childhoods. In interviews from these conventions, you can see the real Ken Weatherwax. He was a quiet, gentle, and often shy man. There was a sadness in his eyes, but also a wry sense of humor about his strange journey. He spoke honestly about the bullying and the difficulties he faced, but without bitterness or self-pity. There was a quiet dignity about him. He once said of his post-acting career, "I'm not a star, I'm a working man." This simple statement is incredibly revealing. He had completely let go of the ego and ambition that drives so many in Hollywood. His goal was no longer fame. It was simply to lead a good, productive life. One of the rarely discussed but crucial aspects of his story is the context of his showbiz family. Unlike many child stars who are pushed into the business by ambitious parents with no industry experience, Ken was born into it. His aunt, Ruby Keeler, was a massive star who had experienced the dizzying heights of fame and the subsequent decline in her own career. One would think this family history would have better prepared him or his parents for the pitfalls of child stardom. This adds a layer of complexity to his story. It wasn't a case of innocence exploited, but rather a continuation of a family business, a business whose inherent dangers were perhaps underestimated even by those who had lived them. The fact that his own half-brother was also a child actor speaks to a family deeply enmeshed in an industry that is notoriously unkind to its youngest participants. The primary controversy surrounding Ken Weatherwax is not about any scandal he was involved in, but rather a deep philosophical debate about the nature of his experience. Was the Addams family a blessing or a curse? The answer is heartbreakingly complex. On one hand, it was a blessing. It gave him an incredibly happy 2-year experience on a supportive family-like set. It made him a part of television history and gave him a legacy that continues to delight new generations. The financial rewards, though modest by today's standards, provided a foundation for his life. But on the other hand, the curse was devastatingly real. The role of Pugsley effectively destroyed any chance he had of a future acting career. The typecasting was absolute. More tragically, it directly led to years of intense bullying that inflicted deep and lasting psychological wounds. It forced him to grow up too fast and to confront a level of public scrutiny and cruelty that no child should have to endure. His story becomes a powerful case study in the ethics of child acting, particularly in an era before robust legal and psychological protections were in place. It forces us to ask difficult questions about what we, as a culture, owe the children we turn into celebrities. Do we have a responsibility for their well-being after the show ends and the spotlight moves on? Ken's story suggests that too often the answer has been no. The historical significance of Ken Weatherwax's life is twofold. First, he is a permanent and essential part of a major cultural touchstone. The Addams Family has proven to be one of the most enduring creations of the 20th century. With countless movies, remakes, animated series, and the recent blockbuster Netflix show Wednesday, the family is more popular than ever. In every single one of these iterations, the character of Pugsley exists, and every portrayal owes a debt to Ken Weatherwax's original performance. He established the character's sweet-natured, slightly gullible, and inventive personality. He is the original, the blueprint, and as long as the Addams Family exists, his work will, in some form, continue to be seen. Second, and perhaps more importantly, his personal story has become a powerful, if quiet, symbol of the dark side of childhood fame. He is the face of the forgotten child star. For every Ron Howard or Jodie Foster who successfully navigates the transition to an adult career, there are hundreds of Ken Weatherwaxes, kids who shine brightly for a moment and then spend the rest of their lives dealing with the consequences. His story is not one of drug-fueled flameouts or public meltdowns, which often grab headlines. It's a quieter, more common, and arguably more poignant story of a person who simply tried to build a normal life in the shadow of an extraordinary childhood. He represents the quiet dignity of survival, a resilience that doesn't demand applause but deserves our deepest respect and empathy. On December 7th, 2014, Ken Weatherwax was at his home in Box Canyon, California. He suffered a massive heart attack and died. He was only 59 years old. It was a tragically premature end for a man who had finally seemed to find a measure of peace. His death was quiet, much like the life he had chosen to lead. He was a private man, and his passing was a private affair. In the end, the story of Ken Weatherwax is one of profound contradictions. He was a beloved television star who was tormented by his own fame. He was a member of a famous fictional family who found his truest sense of belonging in the blue-collar camaraderie of a film crew. He was a man defined by a single role, who spent a lifetime trying to prove he was something more. He may have been trapped by the ghost of Pugsley Addams, but he never let it defeat him. He simply sidestepped the spotlight, rolled up his sleeves, and got to work building a different kind of life, a life of quiet integrity, humble labor, and hard-won peace. He may not have had the dazzling career some had hoped for him, but in his quiet resilience, Ken Weatherwax achieved something far more difficult and far more noble. He found a way to be himself.